In a company that proudly flaunts its diversity policies, Jasmine Lawson, a brilliant black professional, finds herself publicly humiliated and falsely blamed by her white male superior during a team meeting. When she dares to speak up, HR gaslights her, silences her, and begins quietly dismantling her career. But Jasmine isn't just another name on a file. She's kept the receipts. Now, armed with their own policy and undeniable evidence, she walks into HR with one goal: to flip the script. What happens next? Watch how one woman's quiet defiance threatens to bring an entire system to its knees. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly, humming like mosquitoes in a stagnant room. It was the kind of open-plan conference space that corporations like to call collaborative, though everything about it, the beige carpet, the artificial ferns, the walls plastered with strategic goals, felt sterile and accusatory. A long glass wall looked out over the parking lot where Jasmine Lawson had parked her aging Honda Civic just 20 minutes earlier, unaware that today would be the beginning of a quiet war. She sat near the edge of the crowd, spine straight, notebook open. The cover was leather, worn smooth from years of careful handling. Her pen rested gently in her fingers. Blue ink, medium point, always the same. Her yellow blouse, pressed and tucked into slate-gray slacks, stood out gently in a sea of company polos and crumpled button-downs. She was always careful, always measured. That's how she survived in places like this. The VP of Operations, Brian Westcott, stood at the front of the room. White, early 40s, skin like sanded pine, voice like a cold faucet. He wore the smug air of someone who believed authority was an inherent trait, genetic even. His eyes scanned the room as he droned through slides filled with metrics and Q2 jargon, occasionally cracking a joke that only other white men in the room dared to laugh at. Then came the pivot. "I want to pause here," he said, clicking the slide remote. The screen behind him froze on a graph. "There's been a noticeable decline in processing efficiency out of the logistics team this month. And you know," he smiled like someone about to flip a card at a rigged table, "some of that comes down to personal accountability." He turned slightly, gaze locking onto the corner of the room where Jasmine sat. "I'd like to call out Jasmine Lawson here. Jasmine, care to explain what happened with the Westmore file? You were lead, correct?" There was a brief pause in the room. Not silence, but something worse. A hush heavy with anticipation. Chairs creaked as heads turned. Jasmine blinked. Her throat went dry. "I wasn't lead on Westmore," she said carefully, keeping her voice low but clear. "That was under Ken's workflow. My role was just compiling post-review summaries." Brian's smile widened, wolfish. "Really? Because according to the tracking sheet, your initials are stamped across half the chain." He clicked again. A screenshot of an internal document appeared on the monitor, Jasmine's name highlighted. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her mind scrambled, not for defense, but for order, for memory. That file had passed through 5 hands. The initials were there, but only because she'd flagged inconsistencies. She hadn't let it. She had cleaned it. "I flagged inconsistencies for Ken to resolve," she said, trying not to glance at the HR director sitting at the side of the room, arms folded. "That wasn't oversight, it was quality control." Brian laughed. "Well, seems like your version of quality control could use some quality control." A few chuckles. Not many, but enough. Enough to feel it. Like being pinched by invisible fingers across the skin. Jasmine lowered her gaze to the table. Her fingers gripped the pen. She didn't scribble, didn't speak. Her silence had a sharp edge, but no one there was interested in its shape. Brian's voice continued, smoothly shifting back into metrics. The Westmore file was never revisited. The point had been made, not to correct the record, but to mark her, to remind her. Jasmine didn't hear the rest of the meeting. She didn't need to. The damage had already taken root like oil in water, spreading outward unseen, until everything was subtly stained. Even when the meeting broke and people stood and stretched and walked out in clusters, no one met her eye. One coworker gave a sympathetic half smile, the kind that says, "I saw what they did, but I won't say it out loud. I need my job too." Back at her desk, her screen was lit with notifications. Slack messages pinged silently. One from Ken. "Hey, didn't mean to throw you under, hope you're okay?" She didn't reply. Instead, she opened a blank email. To HRSummitIndustries.com, subject, clarification and concern, public disciplinary comments during team-wide meeting. She wrote slowly, carefully, no emotion, just precision. She attached the relevant workflow logs, screenshots, timestamps. She cited the Employee Code of Conduct, Policy 4.7. Constructive feedback is to be delivered privately unless explicitly agreed upon by both parties. She bolded that line. Before she hit send, she looked at her reflection in the blacked-out screen of her second monitor. Still composed, still here. Click. She folded her hands and waited for the next move. The HR conference room had no windows, just 4 beige walls, a circular table, and a bowl of stale peppermints that no one ever touched. A potted plant in the corner drooped toward a dead outlet. The air conditioning kicked on intermittently, exhaling cold breaths like an impatient sigh. Jasmine Lawson sat across from 2 people who had the power to end her career with a sentence, but couldn't remember what floor her department was on. Across from her sat Graham Denton, Director of Human Resources, tall, pale, soft around the chin. His expression always hovered somewhere between bored and benevolent, like a man allergic to confrontation but addicted to hierarchy. Beside him, Angela Knox, Associate HR Rep, offered a stiff smile that looked photocopied. Her notepad was pristine, untouched. "Thanks for coming in, Jasmine," Graham began, leaning back just enough to create distance. "We wanted to follow up on the email you sent regarding the incident during the team meeting." Jasmine kept her expression unreadable. She folded her hands in her lap, resisting the urge to interlock her fingers too tightly. "We reviewed your concerns," Angela interjected, voice neutral and clipped. "And after looking at the documentation, we found no policy violations." A pause, just long enough to be insulting. "I see," Jasmine said calmly. "So citing an error in front of 30 employees, incorrectly assigning blame, and attaching my name to a file I didn't lead. None of that rises to a breach of conduct?" Angela offered a small, mechanical shake of her head. Mr. Westcott's commentary fell within managerial discretion. He was discussing team performance trends. There was no indication of malicious intent. Jasmine blinked slowly. Malicious intent. Intent was the currency of HR, not outcome, not humiliation, just whether the offending party meant to crush you. "And the policy I cited in my email?" Jasmine asked. "Policy 4.7? Graham offered the smile of a man who'd already decided what page they were closing to move on. "Policy 4.7 encourages private feedback," he said, "but doesn't strictly prohibit public commentary in performance contexts. And, if I may be honest, it seems the misunderstanding here may stem from cultural communication styles." Jasmine didn't speak. She let the silence spread. Angela looked down at her notes, though nothing had been written. "We'd like to offer you a coaching opportunity," she said, as if presenting a gift. It's not disciplinary. It's about growth, strengthening communication dynamics, especially in cross-functional environments. The insult was gentle, dressed in silk, but it was still an insult. You're saying I need coaching, Jasmine said, her voice even. Because a white man lied in front of a room and you're too scared to correct him. Angela flinched. Graham's smile dimmed by half. Let's not characterize things unfairly, he said quickly. We're just trying to ensure harmony across teams. The optics are very clear, Jasmine interrupted. And I'm glad we agree on that. A pause. Longer now. Uncomfortable. She could feel the temperature in the room drop. We're not here to argue, Angela said. We're here to move forward constructively. Jasmine nodded slowly, once. Then I'd like a printed copy of the handbook, she said, standing. The full version, not the onboarding summary. Graham hesitated. You can access that online. I prefer paper, Jasmine replied. Sometimes things disappear online. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was steel beneath it now. Angela stood too. Of course. We'll send one to your desk. Jasmine turned to leave. Just before her hand touched the doorknob, Graham's voice reached her again. Soft, rehearsed, like a piano chord played too often. Jasmine, let's not make this adversarial. We want you to succeed here. She paused, hands still on the door. I know, she said. You just want me to succeed quietly. And then she walked out. Down the hallway, back to her cubicle, past the posters of inclusivity, the laminated photos from last month's diversity potluck, the smiling faces who didn't look at her as she passed. She sat at her desk, opened her drawer, took out a yellow legal pad, and began to write. The break room always smelled like burnt coffee and old plastic. Even when no one brewed a pot, the scent lingered in the walls, in the stained countertop, in the air vents that whined every time the microwave ran. Jasmine Lawson sat at the far end of the small table, beneath a flickering light that gave her skin a sickly hue in the reflection of the vending machine. She held a paper cup in both hands, the liquid inside untouched and already cold. Across from her sat Marcus Tolles, a project coordinator 2 floors down, another black employee in a building full of polite indifference. He had once joked that the elevators at Summit Industries were like social hierarchies. Some of them only went up if your badge was the right color. Look, he said quietly, leaning in with his forearms on the table. I'm not saying what they did was right. Hell, I watched that meeting. I cringed so hard I almost left, but... Jasmine raised an eyebrow. But what? He glanced toward the door. Empty. Still, his voice dropped lower. But I've seen this play out before, he said. You push too hard, and suddenly your projects start getting reassigned. Your calendar gets lighter, until one day you walk in and your badge stops working. She didn't respond. Her eyes dropped to the steamless cup. I'm telling you as a friend, he continued. Just let it go, Jazz. Lay low for a few months. They'll forget, or pretend they forgot. Either way, you get to keep your job, your benefits, your peace. Peace? She asked, her voice steady. You think this is peace? Marcus leaned back, exhaled. It's survival. Jasmine stared at the floor tiles. Each one was slightly different. Off-white squares with flecks of gray, like a broken mosaic that never came together. She wanted to scream, not because Marcus was wrong, but because he was probably right. You know what hurts? She said, looking up. It's not even about the file, not really. It's that they did it publicly. And when I pushed back, they acted like I was the problem, that I had overreacted, that maybe it was a cultural misunderstanding. You ever notice how our culture is always the one being misunderstood? Marcus didn't answer. His silence was not consent. It was fatigue. I've played by every rule, she went on. I've documented everything, smiled when I didn't want to, let jokes slide, let credit slip. I've done all of it, and still, they treat me like I'm a threat, like my clarity is aggression. He rubbed his palms together slowly, then stood. I know, I do. Just watch your back, okay? She nodded. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, and Jasmine was alone again. She didn't go back to her desk immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened her calendar. Her upcoming tasks had already shifted. One had been reassigned to Ken without notice. Another meeting had vanished entirely. She checked her work email. Nothing. Then she tried logging into the internal document management system. Access denied. Her heart thudded. She tried again. Access denied. 2 minutes later, an email pinged into her inbox. From HR, subject, cautionary reminder regarding internal communication practices. Jasmine, following recent events, we've noticed increased traffic in your access logs that raises concern. This is not a disciplinary action, but a reminder that dissemination or review of internal materials outside of scope may be in violation of protocol. HR department. She sat frozen. They were watching her. She closed her eyes. The silence pressed in around her like a second skin, tight, suffocating, inescapable. That night, at home, Jasmine sat on her bed with a folder in her lap, a hard copy. Dozens of printed emails, logs, notes, and screenshots she'd been quietly compiling over the last year. A thick record of quiet bias, of subtle exclusions, of performance reviews with glowing comments and no promotions, of meetings she wasn't invited to until the deck had already been finalized, of being told she was intimidating during presentations and too quiet in brainstorms, of compliments shaped like constraints. She flipped through each page slowly, one by one, hands steady. Then she made 3 copies. One stayed in her apartment, one went into a safety deposit box, and one she slipped into a padded envelope addressed to her personal lawyer, just in case. When she returned to work the next morning, her login had been restored, but they knew. And now, so did she. The HR department was quiet that morning, too quiet. Jasmine could feel it in the tension of the carpet under her feet, in the polite but brittle smiles of the reception staff, in the way Graham Denton's assistant avoided eye contact as she waved her in. She stepped into the same windowless room from before, beige walls, dying plant, that same bowl of peppermints. But today, she didn't sit, not right away. She placed a thick binder on the table, black, leather-spined, tabbed with color-coded markers and labeled sections. Her posture was calm. Her blouse was crisp, tucked beneath a tailored blazer the shade of deep graphite. No earrings, no lipstick, just clarity. Graham Denton looked up from his laptop and hesitated. Angela Knox sat beside him again, this time with a laptop open and fingers poised like they were waiting to deflect. "Good morning," Jasmine said, then sat down. Her voice was calm, too calm. Graham offered a smile. "Jasmine, glad you could make it on short notice." "I appreciate the invitation," she replied, flipping open the binder. "Let's get right into it." Graham blinked. Angela stiffened. "I've reviewed the employee handbook," Jasmine said, sliding a printed sheet toward them. "Specifically, Policy 4.7, regarding constructive feedback, and Policy 9.3, which outlines standards for documentation and accountability. According to your own words, quote, No employee shall be subject to public corrective action without prior review and confirmation of fault. Graham opened his mouth to speak, but Jasmine raised a second sheet. "Here," she said, voice still steady, "is the full email thread from the Westmore case. You'll notice my role was supplementary, report consolidation only. The source of the delay was a vendor discrepancy and a missed sign-off by Ken Plaskin." Angela looked down at the paper as if it might bite her. "This," Jasmine continued, tapping another tabbed page, "is a time-stamped copy of the document review chain, showing Ken's sign-off 4 hours past deadline and my comments correcting the issue afterward." Graham cleared his throat. "Jasmine, this level of detail isn't necessary. We're not conducting an investigation." "I know," she said sharply. "You're conducting damage control." A pause. The fluorescent lights hummed like nervous insects. Angela tried to smile. "We understand your concern. Really, we do, but—" "No," Jasmine said, and now her voice dropped, not in volume, but in temperature. "What you understand is liability, and what you're hoping is that I'll play dumb. I won't." Graham folded his hands. "Let's not make this adversarial." "You already did," Jasmine said, "when you excused public humiliation as a communication style, when you offered coaching instead of correction, when you suspended my access under the pretense of protocol." Angela's laptop closed with a soft click. "We hear you, Jasmine. Let's take a step back and—" "I'm not asking for an apology," she said. "I'm asking for alignment with your own policy. And if that's not possible internally, I'll escalate externally." Graham shifted in his seat. "Are you threatening litigation?" "I'm stating intent," Jasmine replied. "Just as clearly as you stated yours when you chose to ignore documentation and gaslight my position." For the first time, the room felt colder to them than it did to her. "I'm not angry," she added, almost softly. "I'm not raising my voice. I'm citing facts. I'm showing my work. And if this company values transparency and equity like it says on every laminated poster in the hallway, now's the time to prove it." Graham leaned back, visibly weighing his options. Angela scribbled something in a notepad for the first time. "We'll need time to review these documents," Graham finally said. "Of course," Jasmine replied, standing. "I'll expect written confirmation of next steps by end of day, just like any other employee would." She gathered her binder, turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "And I'd like a written acknowledgement that I followed all chain of command procedures before raising this concern. It'll help the EEOC filter out the noise when they investigate retaliation." The color drained just slightly from Graham's face. Jasmine walked out slowly, the binder pressed to her chest like armor. Her heart beat fast beneath her blazer, but it was steady. Not fear, not even adrenaline. It was the rhythm of a woman who had read the handbook too, a week past. Jasmine received no updates, no calendar invites, no follow-up memos. The office around her hummed along like nothing had happened. Co-workers talked in hushed voices that stopped when she passed. Eyes darted, then dropped. Her inbox filled with tasks, but none involving the Westmore account. Ken Plaskin now had full ownership of it, and Brian Westcott hadn't spoken to her since the meeting, not even a sideways glance in the hall. Then, on a Tuesday morning at 10:04 a.m., a sterile email arrived from HRSummitIndustries.com. Checked. Notice of internal review process. Dear Ms. Lawson, in light of recent concerns, Summit Industries has initiated an internal review to assess the concerns raised during recent discussions. This review will be conducted by our Ethics and Integrity Subcommittee. Please note that this review is confidential, and participation from involved parties will be determined at the discretion of the reviewing body. We appreciate your continued professionalism during this time. It ended without a signature. Jasmine read it twice, then again. No invitation to provide testimony, no confirmation of her documentation. Just a loop, the company investigating itself, with the door already closed to the person who made the complaint. She didn't reply. Instead, she forwarded the email to her personal account. Then she saved a PDF copy to a cloud folder titled Evidence Ongoing. That afternoon, a message landed in her inbox from an anonymous address. Subject: You're not the first. Thought you should see this. M. Attachment: Resignation, Chark Letter, 2019 PDF. She hesitated only a moment before opening it. The letter was dated July 8, 2019. A name she didn't recognize. Darlene Brooks, former Strategic Communications Manager. In the body of the letter was an account that made Jasmine's jaw tighten. I am resigning due to ongoing marginalization, unaddressed discrimination, and the hostile culture of performative inclusion at Summit Industries. I have been told I am too direct, not collaborative enough, and abrasive, all during performance reviews that simultaneously praised my efficiency and results. When I asked for specifics, I received only silence. When I raised concerns with HR, they launched an investigation without ever speaking to me. 2 weeks later, I was told the matter had been resolved. I was never told how, because I wasn't part of the matter. I was just the noise. Jasmine read it again and again. Same language, same tactics, same silence. She searched the company directory for Darlene's name. Nothing. No archived profile, no announcement of departure. It was like she'd never existed. She printed the letter, slipped it into her file, and then she sat back, letting her eyes fall on the office around her. The posters of smiling, multiracial staff, the words integrity and trust etched into glass doors. The lie was no longer abstract. It had a pattern, a signature. Jasmine opened a new browser window, eoxc.gov. Her fingers hovered for just a second, then began to type, filing a formal complaint. Retaliation, discrimination, hostile workplace. She saved the draft, not yet submitted, but ready. Then, she opened her drawer and pulled out a blank notebook. She titled the first page, What They Say When They Think I Won't Remember. That night, she went home and reread Darlene's letter. Then she read her own notes, her email threads, her Slack messages. One phrase kept ringing in her ears. The matter had been resolved. Without her, without a voice. Not this time. The letter from the EEOC arrived on a Thursday. Official, unemotional, clear. Summit Industries had been notified of a formal complaint filed under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, citing racial discrimination, workplace retaliation, and systemic bias. The investigation would proceed independently. Jasmine's name, her dates of employment, and the initial evidence submitted were listed plainly. She read the letter once, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the same black folder she had carried since the day in HR. By noon, her company email was flooded with silence. Not a single message, not a meeting invite, not a request. By 1:17 p.m., her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Jasmine Lawson, a male voice asked, polished, polite, practiced. Yes. This is Gregory Fennell, outside counsel for Summit Industries. I'm reaching out regarding a recent filing you may have submitted. First, let me just say we're eager to resolve any misunderstandings amicably. We want to ensure everyone feels heard. Jasmine didn't reply. Not yet. Gregory continued. You've always been a respected employee here. It would be unfortunate if this escalated into something that creates unnecessary friction or reflects poorly on your future employability. There it is, she thought, the threat dressed as concern. She waited one beat, then two. I assume this call is being recorded on your end? She asked. A pause. Yes, Gregory said finally, for documentation. Good, she replied, her voice smooth as glass. So let's be clear. The misunderstandings you're referring to are documented violations of Summit's own policies, supported by time-stamped communication logs, internal workflow data, and direct statements from managerial staff. I have retained legal counsel, and I have archived emails, Slack threads, meeting recordings, and HR correspondence, all backed up in triplicate. I suggest your team request discovery from your own servers. It'll save us all time. Another pause, longer this time. You recorded meetings? He asked, voice dipped in disbelief. I recorded my screen during my meetings on my company-issued device. Your own IT policy doesn't prohibit internal recordings for personal documentation unless they're shared externally, which I haven't done. You weren't supposed to. He stopped himself. That's unusual. Unusual, Jasmine said calmly, is being publicly humiliated and told to take coaching while the actual offender gets reassigned upward. Unusual is watching co-workers erase you from meetings you created. Unusual is finding resignation letters from former employees who wrote my story before I lived it. There was no reply. You should know, she added. I haven't gone to the press. Not yet. Because I believed for a moment that the process would work, that the truth could speak for itself. Gregory coughed. Let me take this back to my team. You do that. She ended the call. Outside her office window, the sky was a hard blue, unblinking. For the first time in weeks, the hallway beyond her desk felt quiet in a different way. Not the silence of exclusion, but the stillness before a storm breaks. At 3:11 p.m., an email arrived from HR. Subject: Document preservation request. Jasmine, please refrain from deleting or altering any work-related files, emails, or communications. This request is part of our legal compliance process. HR department? She smiled. They knew. She replied with one line. Don't worry, I never delete anything. JL. That night, she didn't check her inbox. She went home, lit a candle, and opened her file. One tab read, Timeline of incidents. Another, cross-referenced policy violations. Another, key witnesses, silent and otherwise. At the bottom of the folder, a final tab, newly added, leverage. They weren't just afraid of what she knew now. They were afraid of what she had kept. The letter was printed on thick, cream-colored paper and hand-delivered in an unmarked envelope. Jasmine opened it at her kitchen table, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside her. The language was careful, every word chosen not to admit guilt, but to gesture at empathy. We deeply regret any misunderstanding or discomfort caused during your time at Summit Industries. While we do not admit to any wrongdoing, we acknowledge the complexity of your experience and the unfortunate nature of recent events. In the spirit of resolution, we are prepared to offer a private settlement of $85,000, contingent upon the signing of a standard non-disclosure agreement. Jasmine read it all the way through, then again. Then she folded the letter, tore it in half, and dropped it gently into the trash. No one at Summit had called her since the EEOC complaint. No manager had dared to speak her name in meetings. She had become a ghost with too much evidence to exercise. The NDA offer was their olive branch, not extended out of conscience, but fear. That same night, she sat at her desk and pulled up an email draft. To Layla Robeson, an investigative journalist at the Washington Current. Layla had been covering workplace discrimination cases for years, always with a scalpel, never a sledgehammer. Jasmine's subject line was simple: Summit Industries, a pattern of policy without practice. She didn't send attachments. Not yet. Just an offer. I have documentation, not just about me, but others. I have emails, policies, internal memos, former employee statements, and recordings. I'm not seeking money. I'm seeking exposure. Let me know if you're interested. JL Layla responded within 4 hours. Absolutely. Let's talk. The next morning, Jasmine met her at a small cafe downtown. Layla wore no makeup and carried 2 notebooks. She asked sharp, direct questions, but listened more than she spoke. When Jasmine laid out the binder and the resignation letter from 2019, Layla didn't blink. Instead, she whispered, "There's always another Darlene." They met 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Jasmine handed over everything, redacted where needed, anonymized when necessary. She didn't ask for edits. She didn't ask for control. She just asked for truth. On a Monday morning, the article dropped. The Silence Clause: How Summit Industries Built a Culture of Apology Without Accountability. The opening paragraph quoted directly from Darlene Brooks's resignation letter. The second paragraph detailed Jasmine's experience: dates, names, quotes from the handbook. There were screenshots of internal HR policy conflicts, statistics on promotion gaps, anonymous quotes from 3 current employees who had never dared speak before. The story spread like oil across glass, quiet at first, then impossible to look away from. Summit Industries issued a public statement by noon. "We take all allegations seriously. We are reviewing the claims made in the article and will be conducting an internal audit of our equity and compliance practices." The comments beneath the post were brutal. Translation: "We're only sorry we got caught." Another company with a diversity banner and a discrimination core. Where's Jasmine now? I want to hear her speak. By Tuesday morning, Jasmine's LinkedIn was flooded with messages. Some from strangers, some from journalists, some from other Black women in corporate spaces who wrote things like, "You said what I couldn't. I'm printing that article for my HR meeting. They made a mistake assuming you'd stay quiet." On Wednesday, Layla sent her a message. "They're threatening to sue me. That's how I know the article hit where it needed to." Jasmine replied, "Truth is always a liability to people who run on lies." Later that night, she stood in her apartment, binder in hand, watching the city lights flicker through her living room window. The NDA had been their last move. And now? Now the story was too loud to bury. The courtroom was colder than Jasmine expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Quiet, exacting, and clinical in its restraint. Sunlight filtered through high windows but barely touched the polished wood. The Summit Industries legal team sat to the left, stiff in charcoal suits and panic disguised as poise. Jasmine sat to the right, alone at a long oak table with nothing in front of her but a glass of water and a spiral notebook. Behind her, the gallery was nearly full. Former employees, a few journalists and strangers who had only read the article, but now wanted to see the woman who had written herself back into the narrative. When the judge finally nodded, she stood. "State your name for the record," the attorney prompted. "Jasmine Lawson," she said clearly, her voice echoing just slightly. The questioning began as expected. Her role, her responsibilities, the sequence of events. She answered plainly, without embellishment. When they tried to trap her in language, did you feel discriminated against, or do you believe there was intent? She kept her answers rooted in fact. I believe the company's actions reflected bias, whether they intended it or not, she said. Bias doesn't require malice, just comfort. The Summit Council shifted uncomfortably. And when you were offered a settlement, why did you decline it? She looked out over the courtroom, not at the judge, not at the jury, but at the women in the back row. Because silence wasn't worth more than the truth, she said. The prosecutor leaned forward. Do you believe your case is unique? No, she said. I believe it's documented, and that's the difference. Then came the cross-examination. Graham Denton took the stand first. His voice was quieter than usual. The defense attorney led him gently. She misunderstood, didn't she? It was all a breakdown in communication. Jasmine was given no chance to respond until they gave it to her directly. Ms. Lawson, the judge said, you have the right to respond to these characterizations before we proceed to witness review. She stood slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. Instead, she picked up her spiral notebook and flipped to a tab marked timeline. Then she began. 1. February 3rd. I was told I was too quiet in meetings. 2. March 8th. My deck was given to another manager to present without notice. 3. April 21st. I received an informal warning for tone in an email that contained zero subjective language. 4. May 14th. I was accused of leading a project I didn't lead and humiliated in front of my peers. 5. May 15th. I cited your own policy. You responded by suspending my access. 6. June 3rd. You offered me money to disappear. She closed the notebook softly. Then she looked at the defense attorney and said, "Let that sit." A hush fell over the courtroom. No one moved, not even the judge. "That's what you asked me to do, isn't it?" she said, quieter now. "Let it go. Let it sit. Let the weight of it pass without protest." She turned to face the summit executives. "I want you to feel what it's like when the weight doesn't move, when it stays, when it presses, when it speaks." She sat back down, and the silence was the loudest thing in the room. The next witness, a former junior analyst, spoke with trembling hands about being overlooked for promotions 3 years in a row. The next told a story nearly identical to Jasmine's. By the fourth testimony, it no longer felt like a trial. It felt like reckoning. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Flashbulbs clicked. Microphones were extended. But Jasmine didn't stop to speak. She stepped down the marble stairs in silence. At the bottom, she paused and looked up at the building, cold, grand, and unmoved. And then she kept walking. Not because it was over, but because the echo had just begun. The auditorium wasn't large. No grand marble staircases or velvet curtains. Just a modest hall inside the University of DC Law Center, lined with wooden chairs and a single podium beneath a banner that read, "Legal Equity in Practice. Stories, Systems, Survival." Jasmine stood at the edge of the stage, watching as the last of the attendees filtered in. Students mostly, a few lawyers, a handful of policy scholars, and 2 rows of young professionals holding notebooks in their laps like armor. The lights above weren't harsh, but they were focused. This time, they were pointed at her by invitation. She wore a black blazer over a cream blouse, her curls pinned back, simple earrings glinting just enough to catch the eye. No script in her hand. Just a single folded paper she held loosely at her side. When she stepped up to the podium, the room quieted without being asked. She waited. just long enough to let the air settle. Then she began. "I used to think injustice was loud," she said, "that it shouted, that it stormed into the room. But most of what happened to me, most of what happens to women who look like me, was silent, neatly documented, dismissed as policy." She looked up, her gaze sweeping slowly across the crowd. "My file at Summit Industries is probably still marked voluntarily resigned. There's probably an internal note that I was non-collaborative. What they won't say is what I carry with me, that I refused the money, that I refused the silence, that I refused to disappear." She reached down and unfolded the page she had brought. "This," she said, lifting it slightly, "is the same policy they tried to use against me. Section 4.7, Employee Conduct, Corrective Feedback, and Disciplinary Transparency." She read it aloud, slowly, clearly, every word. Then she folded it again. "When I read this to them, they told me I misunderstood it," she said. "But what they really meant was, I wasn't supposed to understand it, because understanding their rules meant I could hold them accountable to them, and that made me dangerous." A ripple of nods moved through the audience. "I'm not here to tell you how to win," she continued, "because some battles don't have clean victories. But I am here to tell you that if you feel the silence pressing down, if you're sitting at your desk wondering if the gaslighting is real, if you're being told to be grateful while being erased." She paused. "You're not alone." The room held still. She let the sentence linger like incense. "Systems change slowly," she said. "And not because they're broken, but because they're working exactly as they were designed to. But every time we name them, every time we choose not to sit quietly, we crack something open. Even if it's small, even if it's just a line in an email, even if it's just a story." She stepped back from the podium slightly, not to leave, just to breathe. In the second row, a young black woman with thick glasses and a yellow notebook held Jasmine's gaze. She didn't smile. She just nodded, once, firm, like a promise. Jasmine nodded back. Later that evening, as the crowd emptied out and the lights dimmed, she sat alone in the front row, letting the silence wash over her again. But this time, it felt different. Not the silence of erasure, the silence after truth has spoken. At her feet, her worn binder sat closed. Inside it, she'd placed a single new sheet. If this story made you think even for a second, then share it. Not for me. For the next woman who reads the policy and knows she's not wrong. She stood, picked up the binder, and walked out, not into spotlight, but into dusk. The street outside was quiet, the world unchanged, but the ground beneath it, it had shifted.